everyone, my name's Nick Bishop, I'm a director with Solution Focused, and we're going to talk to you today in our Solution Focused Thinking Club tutorial about leadership and leadership standards. With me today is our owner and managing director, John Bullock.
Hi there. Yes, so leadership standards. Why is it important to have leadership standards? What type of standards should we set? What should we do with those standards when we've set them? Why do you think it's important, Nick, to have leadership standards, for a leader to have standards? I know it sounds a bit of a no-brainer question, but why do you think that is?
Well, as the term says, leader. The leader is the person that we take our lead from. We look to them for advice, for guidance, for respect, and the standards they adopt and the values they have are so important because what they don't realise is the impact they have on us, so we look to them to take our lead, as in a word.
Yeah, absolutely. It also helps to measure when things are going right and when things are not so going right. Or things are completely going wrong in some respects. But I see a lot of businesses have standards, Nick. When we go in there, you can even see them on the wall sometimes, can't you? They even tuck them into their values sometimes, which is not always the case. But leaders sometimes don't express what their values are, what their standards are, and why they have got those standards, and also then don't get the team involved with those standards. Imagine you had a brand new team. You went into a business and or a sport, whatever it may be. You have a brand new team in front of you. It's kind of it's like a paint palette, isn't it? It's a clean slate. You can get in and go, this is what I expect. What do you expect from the leader? What does the team expect from the leader? And you can go from there.
I think that's a key point because we talk about leadership values, but it's the leader saying, what do you expect from me?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be both ways, hasn't it, the values? And that's really quite important. So what I'm going to do today is talk just about a few different levels of standards that are really, really important to put in as a leader. And there's quite a key learning point here as well, which is really great standards that a leader helps to set. It involves the team, as we've said, and the team are bought into those standards, so people take responsibility and then go and make them happen.
I think part of the issue is, and you alluded to it before, we have the value set, we have the vision on the walls, but that means nothing. It's just a reminder of what the leadership standards and the values are.
Yeah,
it's the communication and the dialogue and coming back again.
Yeah.
It's not a tell mentality to have a leadership culture.
Yeah. Well, businesses normally cover the first two levels of standard that we're going to talk about. The first level of standard we're going to talk about is what we call basic standards. Now, when we say basic, I really mean basic, Nick. So people turn up on time, looking right, wearing the appropriate thing, acting in an appropriate way. So this is what I would class as basic standard. And to be honest, this should have been either dealt with at interview or certainly at induction when somebody comes in. So that's quite an easy level of standard to set. This is the way that we behave. This is how that you've got to operate. And there's kind of no way around that. That's what it is. Okay.
You mentioned induction, and it might come to the basic part, but that's a critical time as well, John.
Very much
people
so, yeah.
First new to the business.
Yeah.
And I see some people in business on an induction program for a day, a week, whatever. They turn up in Unit X, and the guy who's due to see them isn't prepared.
Yes.
And it's what does it look like? So the induction is so important to make people feel welcome.
If somebody turns up for induction and it's not prepared for, and it's kind of last minute, or you've got to wait for somebody, what does that tell you about standards? Or automatically, as a new person, what does that tell you about standards in the business? What it tells me is the standard is it's okay to be late for a meeting, or it's okay to be unprepared. So that's why it's vitally important we get that induction right with that basic standard.
Mentally, I don't feel valued.
Yeah, correct, absolutely, yeah. So basic standards should really be basic, but not assumed. Don't assume people know what basic standards are. So put them in, like I say, at interview or induction. The next set of standards is what we call role standards. Again, this also should be done prior to the person starting the job or latest at induction, because role standards should be in as part of the job description. It should be in there. You should be able to take your job description out and look at your job description and go, those are the role standards that I have to attain. Those are the standards that I have to link to. Very rarely, unfortunately, are role standards in a job description. They should be, because this is what you've got to do, and then that should be appraised at one-to-ones and appraisals going forward.
And I think what we're also saying here there is that We're not saying you have to behave like this and clone people. We're saying it because we have high standards, we have high expectations, we have high values. This is how we behave around here.
Yeah, and that's so important, especially to a new person as well. The next set of standards is something called team standards. Now, this is where you get the team involved. A great leader will get the team involved. There's a concept called teamship. So Clive Woodward coined this phrase. Now, there's a whole separate tutorial on teamship because it's a subject in its own right. So please go and have a look at that. But in short, teamship is a collective of the team coming together, coming up with some rules or standards, if you like, of how they're going to treat each other. How are they going to support each other, how they're going to hold each other to account, what's going to happen if there's a disagreement in the group, and so on and so on and so on. The key part, though, is that the team are involved in generating these. As you said right at the beginning of the tutorial, Nick, it's really important to get the team involved, isn't it?
And I think I write the weekly solution-focused podcast and the weekly focus that goes out to you all on LinkedIn. And one of the things I wrote about recently was about Gareth Southgate. Now, when we look at him, I'm absolutely convinced that he involved his team as absolute adults.
Yes.
Took feedback, what are we going to do, how are we going to behave, what are our value sets?
Yes.
I'm absolutely convinced he did all that.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. I've read articles where he's been interviewed and he it all talks about team. We even commented on it when some of the England squad were being interviewed at the 2018 World Cup. They were asked a question individually and responded with a team answer. So you could see that there was some standards in place.
But they wouldn't have been told to do that, John, because of the way the manner they'd been led and the group discussions. That's how they honestly felt.
Yeah, and if you can generate this teamship, what it does is it gets people bought in, and if people are bought in, they are more likely then to follow those basic those standards, to follow those teamship standards, and it's dealt with within the team, and the leader there is only there to lead and not manage, which is a completely separate matter. So far we've got basic standards, role standards, which should be given but never assumed, and it should be done at interview or at induction. Then you've got teamship standards or team standards, where you get the team together and they come up with this charter of how they want to treat each other, and what the standards are going to be, and how often you're going to question mediocrity and things like that. Then we move on to the word that always springs up in business when things aren't going very well: communication. Communication standards. And often people might have a communication plan, for argument's sake, but they don't see communication as a standard. So how are you going to communicate with each other? What are you going to communicate with each other? How often are you going to communicate with each other? What media are you going to use to communicate with each other? It's really, really important to have that plan of communication. Without it, it just goes pear-shaped, doesn't it, Nick, without communication in place?
One example I give, I used to work in the insurance profession many, many years ago, and I was talking to an ex-boss of mine who was then regional director of a company. And he said, my new boss, Nick, I said, I don't know how he does it, but he spent little time in his office, limited time on his laptop or keyboard, but he walked the floor. When you've got 1,000 staff, it's not an easy thing to do. But he knew his presence. He would get more feedback and communication by walking the floor for an hour, hour and a half a day, talking to people, getting buy-in, getting feedback, understanding what's going on in the business. Great example. Yeah,
absolutely. So it's really important that you have a communication standard. And if you haven't got that communication standard in your team, you might get poor emails, for argument's sake, and we all know what happens with a poor email. Somebody sends a poor email. Depending on what the punctuation's like, or if it's in capital letters, the other person receives it, they read it as something different as somebody else. And let's face it, email is one of the biggest communication tools that we use in organisations now. So what is the standard? How do you write emails? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? How often do you talk to each other? What do you talk to each other about? And so on and so on. So really important, that one, communication standards. And then the final peak, if you like, the top of the pyramid when it comes to standards, is motivational standards, or fun. We call them motivational. Sometimes people get a bit icky with the word fun, but ultimately, what are the standards in the team? How are people going to motivate each other? What's the deal? How are you going to keep people motivated? We find that being paid a salary doesn't necessarily motivate people. It might motivate them enough to get them to work, but it kind of ends there sometimes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
entry level almost.
So motivational standards. What is it in your team? How are you going to motivate each other? Specifically, how are you going to motivate each other when times are hard? Because it's very, very easy to motivate people when times are good, isn't it? Yes. When times are easy. So motivational standards can't go without it. Now, we suggested that if you start with a brand new team, you can put all of these standards in place, you can get them involved, and so on and so on and so on. If you don't have a new team, which most of us don't, we're in a position in an organisation where we've got a team already, and some of those standards aren't right, or people are doing them at different levels, it's a great opportunity to create what we call this teamship charter and get your team in, draw a line under the stand, express as a leader what your standards are, then get them involved in the teamship standards and the communication standards and the motivational standards, and you can create your leadership standards at that point. Now, what that does is it gives you a tool. It gives you a tool to be able to reward people, firstly, when they're doing those standards on a daily basis, and they're a great example of them. You can reward them, say thank you, give them incentive, whatever it may be, which actually will then, of course, help with the motivational standards that are in place. But also, you can correct people. So if people aren't doing those standards, it's an easier conversation to pull somebody in and say, when you came in yesterday, you did this, this and this. That's not what we agreed.
Let me give you an example, John. When I was in business, one day, one of my team had a fantastic performance. I can't remember what it was right now. I went up and said, John, great job. You know what they said to me? They said, Nick, that meant more to me than my bonus.
Yeah.
Because the bonus is part of the salary.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's expected. It's the expectation.
Yeah.
It's the genuine thing. But it has to be sincere, timely, and understood why they're getting the feedback in the way they are. So they want to go and do it again.
Very much so. And it can really spur people on, can't it, that? So that's really important, the motivational standard is as well. And you can reward people against those standards. You can say thank you, things like that. But you can also correct people if they're not doing those standards. Again, another tutorial on appraisals and giving feedback. So, if that's important to you and you need to be able to do that, then by all means go and watch that video. So let's sum up those 5 levels of standard for you. We started with basic standards. Standards that are turn up on time, looking right, is a given, but never assume that it's that people know what it is, or it needs to be explained. Basic standards, role standards, job description should be in there. Team standards or teamship standards, how people are going to treat each other. Communication standards, so how are you going to communicate, when you're going to communicate, what you're going to communicate, and then finally fun or motivational standards at the top. So to sum up your learning points for you of this module, and we will put those standards on as a download for you next to this module, so you can download those standards and you can go and use them for yourself. The first learning point for this tutorial is have standards, have leadership standards in place. Don't just think people know what they are. Don't just think people know it's the company rules. As a leader, to be more effective, put leadership standards in place and get your team involved in there. That's learning point number 1. Learning point number 2 is then maintain those standards. There's nothing worse you could do than by getting your team involved, creating leadership standards, and then letting them slip. There's nothing worse. You're better off not having standards if that's the case. So learning point number 2, maintain those standards, whether that's saying thank you or whether that's correcting people and giving them feedback. And learning point number 3 is make sure you involve your team all the way along this process. If you involve your team all the way along the process and you get their input, they are much more likely to go and then achieve those standards on a regular basis because they are bought in to the process. So, we hope you've enjoyed this solution-focused thinking tutorial on leadership standards. There's several more in the series, so please feel free to go and watch them. But it's bye from me.
And it's bye from me.
And we'll see you very soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye now.